Hey, I'm Shaye, and you're listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you are a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Today, we are visiting with Terrell Miller, who is the founder and CEO of CattleMax, the most widely used cattle management software in North America and trusted by ranchers in more than 70 countries. Since launching in 1999, he has helped modernize cattle record keeping, evolving the software from a desktop program to fully online, mobile-friendly platform that is accessible anywhere, at any time, which I think we all know is important as ranchers. As an entrepreneur and cattle rancher himself, Terrell leads a remote team of fellow producers and works closely with industry partners to streamline data collection and ensure ranchers get maximum value from their herd records. And what Terrell is really going to be helping us understand as ranchers today in this conversation is the importance of setting New Year's resolutions, how that impacts profitability long term, and why we need those benchmarks that we can get from keeping good herd records to help us be more profitable. So it's an insightful, valuable, and practical conversation that you're sure to enjoy. With that, let's visit with Terrell. All right, Terrell, it is a pleasure to be visiting with you, and welcome to the podcast today. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, hey, thank you. Glad to be here. I'm a long-time listener, first-time participant, so this is exciting.
Okay. Well, we're going to be talking about a couple very important topics for producers today. And to start off, I'd really like to hear your perspective on why it is so important for ranchers to take the time to set some New Year's resolutions.
Well, I mean, the new year is a really fun time. I always enjoy taking the time between Christmas and New Year's to really figure out what the goals are. It's a slower time of year and that type thing. Kids are out of school, so it's a really good time of year to do that. And so it's sort of reflecting on what happened in the previous year. What are some of the wins? And you need to celebrate your successes. Also, look at things that didn't go how you had intended for them to go and go, okay, knowing what I know today, how would I have maybe done that different? I don't ever like to say, I would do this, I would change this, or I wish I could change that, because it's just how life goes. So I always look at it as what would we change different, and then, that kind of leads into setting goals.
And from your perspective, what is kind of that long-term profitability impact of doing that reflection and of setting those goals?
That's a good question. As far as the long-term profitability, and ranching is profitability is really important, but as equally important is really preserving the way of life. Ranching is not a hobby. It's not just a job. It's a way of life that transcends generations. And so having a ranch is an incredible honor, and you need to manage it for profitability to ensure that the future generations can continue to operate it. So, profitability is very, very critical.
Now, I know when we are thinking about New Year's resolutions and setting goals, there are so many different kinds of frameworks or best ways, per se, out there to do it. What tips, or do you have a specific framework that you like or want to share with ranchers?
It's such a highly personalized individual, but I'll be glad to share what's worked for me. And I've tried different things over the year. The one thing that really hadn't worked are to-do lists for me, just because it's just, becomes yet another chore. So the way that I really like to look at goals is I really believe, very much on visualizing it, where I know where I want to go. I set my goal and I see it, smell it, taste it, touch it, whatever. And most importantly, I imagine as if I've already achieved that goal. What does it feel like being at a place of having particular number of cattle, or hitting certain premiums, or having a certain level of organization, or having certain tasks already done? And what does it feel like? And when you start to imagine as if you're already there, then you start to think that way, and the actions you do getting there really help contribute to that. So you really start take that big what it feels like being there, because a lot of times goals fail because people don't have specifics. I want to do X, or I want to do something or another, but really don't know how are you going to get there? What are the milestones along the way? What exactly does it look like? So I think that's really where that visualization helps greatly.
I would agree. I like to also take the time to sit down and say, like, okay, what is it going to feel like once I get to this point? And it can be challenging to put those KPIs or specifics or those measurables. There's a bunch of different terminology around that as well. But it matters because it makes such a big difference on helping us know if we are achieving those goals or not, and even just breaking it down into a simpler format sometimes.
And simpler formatted, even simpler task of, what is the big goal is to get to a certain income level or a certain herd size or whatever it might be. Okay, I want to be at this point by the end of next year. Well, where do I need to be at by the middle of the summer? Where do I need to be at? What is my next 30-day plan? And so otherwise, you're going to look up December 31st and, well, I'm a little bit short. You need to have those sort of checkpoints along the way. And that also has been really helpful to us, especially as we continue to grow, even in CattleMax, in our company, as we look as our team grows and helping everybody set their own individual goals. It's having those checkpoints.
Now, when we're talking about goals for ranching, that can be so diverse, from profit to conception rates to just better understanding nutrition programs. But one thing that I've really picked up on through my own experience as a rancher, visiting with ranchers, and through my Rancher Mind membership area, is that there are a lot of people who usually have some sort of goal around getting more organized, whether that's with financials or herd records, etc. Do you want to touch on the importance of being organized in those areas, maybe even first, before you start diving into other goals?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Organization is just such a key. If you're not organized and you really don't have all of your information together, you don't have it all in front of you. So it's really hard to set those goals and to do your checkpoints along the way without being organized. It really, successfully managing an operation, successfully managing a business, it all starts, with having good organization and good information. Otherwise, you're really in the dark. Over the last 25 plus years, we've worked with a lot of different producers, and sometimes they'll come to us with just in a variety of situations. Often they're essentially working in the dark, and you really can't set effective goals without really knowing where you're at. You can't measure your progress without having that organization.
Absolutely. I always say you need a benchmark before you can move forward.
Right. Exactly. Got to know where you're at to know where you want to go.
Or if you're going anywhere.
That's one of the real dangerous things I see a lot too when people don't have good information and good organization. It's called helicoptering, where the propellers are spinning, but you're just hovering in place. And so the blades are turning, things are going, but you're actually not moving forward. And that's, to me, almost worse than doing nothing at all.
I would agree. Now, can you share about maybe some of those key features that CattleMax has to offer to help producers find that benchmark per se?
When my wife and I built CattleMax 25 years ago, it was for a school project, but really it was a way to get some college credit and get our own family herd organized at that time. And so really what we've designed CattleMax is to be where a rancher keeps all their records in one place. So that's keeping track of cattle records, inventories, performance, reproduction, sales, track pasture management, track equipment. So all of that information's together and sort of eliminate the slips of paper on the dashboard and notes in the barn and shoe boxes of receipts. Because when you have it all together, that really is the first step in getting things organized and moving forward.
And how is that information available to producers? I know when I've done a whole podcast episode just on what to look for before you select a herd record program. And one of those is, is it on desktop, is it on mobile, etc. So can you share how that information is available to producers?
CattleMax is web-based. It's been web-based for about 14 or 15 years now. It was originally a desktop-based software. So it's accessible from any web browser or mobile device. And that's really where virtually all the software is now. I like to compare when we first got started, there was always somebody sort of chained to a desktop or laptop, and they had the title of the record keeper. And there was really not this opportunity for collaboration. So now with everything being online, being web-based, you can have collaboration from the ranch secretary to the manager to the cowboys to maybe even an owner or family members hundreds of miles away. So pretty well most software now, there are web-based. There are some that are mobile only. But what we find with producers is they collect all of this data, which is time consuming, is they want to be able to visualize it on a big screen and look at the reports and the information. So really the idea is the software is wherever the producer needs it, mobile, tablet, or laptop, desktop.
Awesome. Makes it easy. You also brought up that it's not just helping keep track of the cattle on the ranch. You also said there's an equipment component. Can you touch a little bit more into that? Because I can see that tying into maybe even tax season a little bit, or just those financial records.
The equipment is a feature we added several years ago after just talking with customers and even our own team. Our entire customer service team, they're all ranchers. We all use the software in our own herds, and at a meetup a couple years ago, we began talking about what are some things that we're still having to track in spreadsheets that are not in CattleMax. That's really how we identify new areas. And one of the big challenges that did come up with was keeping up with equipment. Maintenance, mileage, or hours, but even simple things like you go into town to the parts shop and you need to remember exactly which filter you need for a specific piece of equipment. So being able to have all of that there to track the maintenance, any kind of expenses, and then some of the details. I'll note that CattleMax is not an accounting system. I know you had a recent podcast on accounting and financial records, and highly recommend that producers go there. But CattleMax does keep track of more, I would say, the production and maintenance type things.
But that is so important as well, because I know even when we were having our kind of end-of-year bookkeeping meeting with our CPA's team, we were talking about, okay, you sold these cows, were they raised or purchased, or same thing with the bulls aspect. And so just being able to easily say yes or no makes a big difference in those scenarios.
One of our customers' favorite features this time of year is what we call our end-of-year organizer feature. And it does just what you need, and that is gathers all that information up and makes it easy to share with the accountant. One of the really neat things about software like CattleMax is you're entering the data throughout the year as it happens. If you buy a cow in January, if you sell some calves in March, if you buy a piece of equipment in April and then you sell some hay, all of these things that go on throughout the year, when it comes time for the end of year, you can go to the end of year organizer, and CattleMax generates a PDF or a spreadsheet that has exactly what you said. All of the animals we purchased this year. What was our death loss? These animals that were purchased that died, were they raised? Because that's treated differently for taxes. And all of that information is sort of put together in a packet that's very easy to share with the accountant. So it saves the rancher time and money with all of that.
All right. Now, I'm curious, we were talking about goals earlier, and with that, whether that's that end-of-year tool or another tool within CattleMax, is there the ability to just look at, say, pregnancy rates year over year for the whole cow herd, or split that into, different groups, etc.? Because sometimes I think that's often an overlooked tool, is being able to just compare those year over year to make sure, like we were talking about earlier, we are making progress.
That's a great point, is getting information out. A good friend many years ago, he mentioned a quote of, without reporting and analysis, you're simply creating an electronic file cabinet. And that's something that's really stuck with us in everything we do in the software, is making sure that people can easily get their data in, and then even more important, how they get things out in a way that's useful to them. In the context of pregnancy rates, sometimes we want to know how an animal, a specific female, has done over the years. We want to know maybe calving intervals. We want to know postpartum intervals, those type things on an individual level, or comparing cow to cow within the herd. But then there's other points where you'd want to be able to go, how did my cow herd do in terms of conception rates or weaning weights or calving percentage this year compared to previous years? And that's where CattleMax really can shine when it comes to the reporting. A lot of producers like to use Excel, and Excel is a good sort of organization step in getting lots of records organized into a spreadsheet. But Excel definitely starts to become not the right fit as you start adding more columns of information, and more importantly, back to your question, as you start to try to get some reporting and analysis out of that. You find it helpful when you can go in there and really get reports the way you need for the groups of cattle or the time periods you need.
Now, if there are producers out there listening who are very much thinking, I need to straighten out my herd record system, get more organized there, what tips do you have for them as they switch to a new platform or something along those, switch to a new platform, or maybe try to invest more in what they already have? What advice do you have there so that they get the most out of what they're using?
That's one of the things that we as a team wake up every day enjoying doing, is being able to help producers get organized, and then it eventually leads to fun things like, okay, now that we're organized, where do we go from there? In terms of initially getting organized, there is no one size fits all. And I think that's sometimes where producers are looking for this checklist, and that checklist varies from each one. And if you're a 1,000-head commercial operation out west that sees your cattle twice a year versus a 20-head registered operation along the Gulf Coast that you can look out your window and see your whole herd. So that's really where I talk about the record keeping, sort of the Goldilocks and the three bears. When it comes to deciding what you want to keep track of, is there's keeping too little information to where you can't make the decisions you need. But there's also, at the other end, keeping so much information that you just overburden yourself and get bogged down in the complexity. So what I always recommend for producers, just getting started, everybody needs an animal inventory. And that's just starting with the cows and bulls, and then later adding in the calves. So really knowing what animals are on your place. And then a next step, sometimes producers want to keep track of which pasture and location. It's a logical next step. And then getting into reproduction information. So knowing which cows are bred, who's supposed to calve, and that type thing. So it's really about getting the animals that are on your place organized first. And then if the producer does want to go back and enter in historical history, kind of do that as they have time. A mistake I see a lot of producers start when they begin record keeping is they're going to go, okay, here's cow number one. I'm going to add her in and then enter in her entire production history. A few days later, you only have 10% of your herd in, and you're not able to start really utilizing your system. So definitely start with the active inventory and then later add historical.
Terrell, one thing that's been more and more common throughout the industry in conversation over the past few years has been the implementation of EIDs and working kind of that whole area of technology onto the ranch. Do you want to touch a little bit or talk more about how that kind of technology plays into keeping more organized records and efficiency?
The electronic IDs are not anything new. They've been around a long time, but what is new is this continued adoption of the electronic IDs. And it's also an area that producers are reading about it in articles, hearing about it in podcasts, and trying to understand how does this affect me? And so when we talk about electronic IDs, there's really two categories or buckets. There are the ISO standard, industry standard RFID tags made by Allflex and Datamars and all of those. And those are a low frequency RFID tag that anybody with a compatible reader can read the tag. It's essentially like a barcode scanner. There's no data stored on it, but it's a very quick way of tracking and scanning animals. So the great thing about the EID is it is a globally unique number. There are no two EID tags with the same 15-digit number. So it ends up being a great sort of supplementary ID. Producers, we're all still using ear tags because that's a lot easier in the pasture, but working cattle, especially larger operations, are connecting the EID readers to where they can scan those tags. Mm-hmm. So, when it comes into something like different traceability programs, PVP programs, they're generally going to be providing some type of electronic ID number. And that's something that in CattleMax, and as well as a lot of other software, there's support for multiple ID methods on that.
All right. What about producers who do genomic testing and have that TSU barcode and some of that data that might be tied into their commercial cattle, or I guess seed stock cattle too?
That's a great question. So on the genomic testing, there's that barcode number, and that's yet another ID that you can keep track of in software. I know that when a rancher first signs into their CattleMax account for the first time, the software asks them, what ID methods do you use? Are you using ear tag, brand, registration number, barcode, EID? And we have customers all over the world, so they're also animal ID for Australia and New Zealand. So we have multiple ID methods like that. The thing about these barcodes, too, when it comes to genomic testing, is it makes it really easy to import in results from Neogen and Zoetis, where you can download your file from either one of these providers, and then that DNA barcode is how it's linked up. And I'll add, I think that genomic testing, especially in commercial cattle, is going to be one of the biggest things that really drives the industry forward. It's an area that we as a company are really bullish on. We've had some great strategic conversations, talking ideas and marketing and promotion with Neogen and Zoetis. So I think as more commercial producers adopt that technology, back to turning the lights on, they really know what this commercial cow, they know a whole lot more about her now.
My husband and I love it. It's been really interesting to add into our operation for sure. So now I also want to touch on the data sharing and privacy aspect, because that is important to producers and for producers to understand. So can you kind of talk about what's going on there, whether that's on an individual CattleMax level or even as an industry, so producers know who owns their data and who has access to it?
Sure, and that's an area that doesn't necessarily get quite as much attention on. There's a lot of just trust that the right thing's being done, and everybody has a different definition of what right is. In the case of CattleMax, all of our data is hosted in the U.S. on U.S. servers, and it's stored in the U.S. and backed up. So that's, at least specific to us. It's not stored in other countries, and whether it's EU or Australia and New Zealand. So that's where the data itself is stored. But in terms of the individual account privacy, like in the case of CattleMax, to be able to access your account, it requires a sign-in where the first one signing up is able to add just who they want to the account. They can control what level of access that person has. If they don't want the cowboys knowing what's being paid for bulls and cows, or if they don't want either the grandkids or the grandparents making changes, adding them as a viewer. So I think that, there's some of that data access there. But I think another really interesting thing that we've been seeing over the last few years has been the data sharing component. And producers are starting to realize they have a whole lot of data, and that data is valuable. That data, whether it's breed compositions, herd health, what treatments they're giving, performance measurements, reproduction. As they're realizing there's data there and there's value that they need to be compensated for. We're seeing different PVP programs and marketing groups that are starting to say, hey, we'll give you back carcass data if you can share some of your herd data with us. So we're seeing some of these data sharing where the producer is able to, on their own, decide what they share, and then they get something in return for it.
You were talking about, you have the option to set people up as viewers, whether, maybe one generation doesn't want the older or the younger generations being able to go in there and make changes. But it really kind of sparked another thought and something we haven't touched on today, but that's how good herd records, or good records of any kind, can tie into transition planning. Do you want to touch on that?
Transition planning is such an important thing, with the average rancher being, I believe, in CBAs is 55 or 58 years old, that thinking about what's going to happen to the ranch afterwards is just really critical. There are a lot of decisions of how it's divided up and who takes over, but just ensuring that the next generation is involved is so critical, and that's important that they understand the records of what's going on the ranch. And I mean, they may know the cows from riding around checking them, but do they know how old a particular cow is, or when she was purchased, that type thing. So the records, whether it's accounting or production records, are a really good point to start that conversation, to really start the knowledge transfer of how to take over the ranch or how to continue it going on to the next generation. A fun thing that we're actually seeing a lot of is it's actually skipping a generation. The grandparents, the generation, are seeing that the kids are busy with life and raising their own kids, and so it's sort of skipping the kids, and it's the grandparents working with the grandkids. And so we're seeing, even our product development manager, he has both of his grandkids set up as viewers on the account, and one of them is probably going to get promoted to where they can edit the records pretty soon. So.
Well, that is really exciting, and an interesting observation, one that doesn't surprise me, when you're talking about the average age of the rancher being in their 50s, depending on what operations have available to bring generations back. It can very much skip generations like that. So, Terrell, as we wrap up today's conversation, if there is one thing you want listeners to remember, what is that?
Ranching is a tough business to make a living in. It really is. There's no days off. It's very time intensive, very labor and financially intensive. But it's also just an incredible way of life, and it's an incredible honor that we as ranchers have to feed the world. And that's also a responsibility that comes along with that, is ensuring that we're doing what we can to produce a good product, that we're tracking the health of our animals, and that also we're ultimately managing our businesses as best as we can to ensure that long-term sustainability and assurance of our own domestic food supply.
All right. Well, folks, if you are listening today and you want more information on anything that we talked about in today's conversation, be sure to check the show notes for that, because we will make sure that there are links in there for you to go look up CattleMax, get some of those tips, try it for yourself, etc. And Terrell, thank you for joining.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to catching up again soon.
All right. And remember, the best way to support this podcast and all your other favorite podcasts is to leave a rating or review, and better yet, share it with a friend who's going to find this information valuable, because podcasts still grow best by word of mouth. But with that, happy ranching, folks.